Small towns across the world hold tales of absolute horror and tragedy. It seems the stories that come from these small population communities really pack a punch. Our perceptions of kind folk in small towns are often shattered in this series. You can never be too careful no matter where you are in this world. If you have a story you would like to share on a future episode, please submit your story at swampdweller.net. It's stories like yours that keep this show going. Much thanks to the subscribers who sent in their stories for this video. Now, let's explore these terrifying, small town horrors. I'm an 18-year-old male from Cleveland, Texas. The city is on the small side and our city district only just became a 4A district, which for those of you who don't know, 4A is just the size of the district. 4A is a middle-sized district. Anyway, with how small the city is, I'm sure you can imagine gossip and rumors run wild. I mean, if you know one person, you practically know everyone. All that said, there is one rumor that a lot of the elders believe. To be honest, I have a very confident belief in this too. This was reinforced after what I'm about to tell you. So according to the stories the elders tell about the forest surrounding the city, there is a beast man within it. I'll tell you the story that was told to me when I was young. About the year 1997, there was a couple that decided to go hunting in the woods surrounding the city. They said that they would be there for 4 days. Though a day and a half in, the wife decided that she didn't like the outdoors and told her husband she was going home. He told her he was fine and he would be back on the 4th day. He also said if she came looking for him, his camp would not move. So the wife gathered her things and went home. She had gone about her daily life up until the 4th day, in which the husband, who was supposed to have returned, never did. As any loved one would do, she got worried and went to the camp. Keep in mind that this was a time when phones are still bricks and not very popular. After arriving at the camp, she found everything was seemingly normal. The fire had been put out and all the gear was packed and ready to go. The thing that wasn't normal was her husband. He wasn't there. She had called his name several times to no avail. Finally, she went back to town to get help. She drove to the local police station and got help from a family member in the force. After looking for a whole day and still being unable to find her, the husband filed a missing persons report and sent a search party out the next day. Towards the end of the day, someone found him, dead. His clothes were torn into pieces and he had lacerations all over his body. His chest was hollowed out from the bottom of the rib cage all the way up to his sternum. His stomach had ripped open. They found his body in a nest. Apparently, the nest looked like a buzzard's nest, but big enough for 4 grown men to sit in. The lacerations looked like that to be of a large cat's. The eaten-out stomach and chest were said to be the work of a dog. During the time the scene was investigated, police reported seeing strange things in the woods. They said it was like a person was watching them from just beyond the tree line. Then they disappeared and suddenly an animal was there where they last saw the person. Each time it was a different animal. They also reported hearing what sounded like a person trying to roar like a bear and howl like a wolf all in one go. The local police force was unable to figure out what had killed the man. They also tried to cover up the investigation. The town being so small, these things didn't go unnoticed. Skipping forward 12 years, I decided to go camping with a couple of friends out in those same woods. We were planning on staying out there for 3 days, but it got cut short. It was the first night and we were all sitting around the fire talking about video games. One, in particular, was an RPG called Skyrim. While we were doing this, a man in an orange vest holding a hunting rifle shows up and said he's out here to hunt for pigs and asked us to keep it quiet so we wouldn't disturb them or scare them off. So as the unarmed people, we politely said okay and all went to sleep. We were woken up around the middle of the night from the sound of the hunter's gun. We heard the gun go off 3 times in a row, back to back, before it subsided. We all shrugged it off and went back to sleep, Or, that's what I thought. Apparently one of the two guys I was with decided he was too nervous to go back to sleep. In the morning, we all decided to gather our things and head out. We didn't want to stay out there, as if someone was hunting so close by, it's not safe. 3 days later, on the local Cleveland news, they had reported a story of a hunter found dead in the woods, mauled by an unknown creature, lying in a very large nest, surrounded by bones. When they showed a picture of the man who had died, it was the same man we saw that night. I had called the guys I was with that night and told him about the new information. The one that had stayed up that night had told me that he heard what sounded like a very high-pitched roar while we were all asleep. He said he didn't tell us because he didn't want to freak us out. When he said that, I instantly remembered the story from the couple back in 1997. I never believed that story until now. My advice from this story would to not take the stories your grandparents tell you for granted. Not only are those stories their legacy, but it also was their advice and warnings to us younger generations. I'm a 25-year-old male living in a small town in Austria called Enns. This story took place when I was 15 or 16, but I can remember it very clearly, and all of my friends that were there with me too. So it was a summer night, and my group of friends and I, about 9 boys, were driving near a river with our dirt bikes. We stopped at a bench to have some cigarettes and chat for a bit. The bench was facing the river on a small cliff, and we were laughing about some jokes. We were going on about our business, when suddenly, we all heard a loud, high-pitched scream come from the water under the cliff. The scream caused us to jump on our dirt bikes and get away as soon as we could. Days later, we were back driving through the woods at night, and again, when we stopped to smoke, we heard a scream right in front of us between the trees. This time it was loud, deep growling, sounded kind of like a lion or a tiger. Again, we all ran away from whatever this thing was. It sounded very heavy and big, and we were all scared to go back into the parts of the woods. Weeks later, a friend called me and told me that there had been a fire in his backyard, and the fence to the alley nearby was burned down. It was a wooden fence, and when I looked at it, I saw a perfect circle burned out of the wood. I was about to mention how strange this was, when an aggressive growling sound interrupted us. It came from the bushes next to the fence, and it shook all the trees and bushes like it was running towards us. We were scared out of our minds and ran back to his house. To this day, I have no idea what these growling sounds were. There's no bears or any big animals where I live. I'll probably never know, and part of me hopes to never find out what is out there. My name is James, and I live in a rural part of New York. Now, I have heard some weird stuff near my house before, but I brushed it off most of the time as there was a creepy forest near my house. That said, I set up a trail camera in my backyard sometimes, and it points to an open field. One of the times I had the camera set up, I caught a person with a crowbar walking through my backyard. Sadly, this isn't the only thing that I've caught that is creepy. Things seemed normal after that, until I found this thing. It was like any other day in my life. It was August 2018. I was getting ready to go back to school. I had left the trail camera on in my backyard for about 5 days. I went outside, got the trail camera, and brought it inside. I had butterflies in my stomach in anticipation of what might be on the footage. I looked through the first 5 days on the trail camera. It was pretty normal stuff. There was nothing but deer. It was on the last day of the footage when I saw this thing on the trail camera. I looked at the first 2 pictures. It looked like a wild deer. Its legs were very odd, and its front ones longer than the back ones. The head was turned away from the camera. I just thought it was a deer. Then, I saw the third picture of it. This was no deer. The head was pointed to the camera this time. The mouth was open and the thing had horns. This thing looked like something out of A Quiet Place. I was thinking maybe this was a skinwalker or something. This picture itself still haunts me to this day. I want to know how to show other people my picture so they can believe. So far, only my friends and family have seen this picture. Just as there are things in the ocean we have yet to discover, I believe there are things in the forest of the world we have yet to discover as well. I believe this thing is one of them. My grandfather was a paranoid man, always looking over his shoulder whenever he would go near a deer trail by a creek that runs through his property. I spent a lot of time with him. Me being one of the youngest of his grandchildren, I wanted to always learn from him. He lived in the Ohio River Valley. My family and I lived in Alaska, but every year I make the trip down to Ohio to help him with his chores before winter sets in. I've dealt with grizzly, brown, and black bears, wolves, and a cougar every now and then. That said, after seeing the thing I saw in those woods, I refused to enter the woods where he lived ever again. It was around mid-October, and I had my crossbow and a .45 long Colt revolver. I was in a tree stand and I heard some leaves get thrown around. With it being mid-rut, I was ready. I sat there and waited. However, what rounded the end of the trail was not any beast I've ever hunted before. It was tall. Taller than me, and I'm 6.5 feet tall. I draw my handgun on the creature, and notice it had skin white as snow, and had blood dripping down its face. I sat there for a moment, watching this creature, and it stood semi-humanoid. I studied the animal for a moment, until the wind shifted and this thing turned on a dime and looked dead into my soul. I fired 2 rounds off of my handgun. I watched as this thing took 2 .45 long Colt hollow point bullets like a champ. It acted like I threw a rock at it. It ran off and I did the same. That was the last time I saw that creature, and that was the last time I've ever been to my grandfather's property. I honestly have no idea what that thing was, but if any of you do, please, comment down below letting me know. This was long ago, so I only remember some of it, so it will be rather short. When I was a kid, I lived in Western New York. I still do today, and had always liked the stories about creatures like the Rake, Jersey Devil, and Dover Demon. I always thought of them as myths. Then, I planned a camping trip to the Allegheny National Forest. And while there, I found a channel similar to yours and started listening to stories. And guess what I found out? Wendigos are very common around the Great Lakes. My brother was watching me, and we were talking about this stuff, when I was like, "Oh no, I'm so scared," in a mocking tone. I forgot to mention there were a few cabins within a few hundred feet, so we were not alone and felt pretty safe. We stayed up until around 2 a.m., and then we heard howling. We were both confused as we were not aware wolves or coyotes were around here. Boy, we were wrong. I heard noises outside, and initially, I thought it was a raccoon or something, so I did not really care that much and didn't take it too seriously. That's when we heard tapping on the side of the cabin and windows. About a half hour later, I was a bit confused, so we went to check it out, and what we saw was no raccoon or any other pest that I could have ever imagined. I mean, unless raccoons are 9 feet tall, smell like a rotting corpse, and have a deer-like skull with long, jagged antlers. I didn't think so. I was terrified as it stared at me. After what seemed like an eternity, but I'm sure it was only a few seconds, it left. I didn't see where it went, I don't know where it went, and I don't care about where it went. I've not run into this thing since, but the image is seared into my mind for life, and I'll never forget this experience until the day that I die. handful of years ago, my washing machine quit working. As a mother to 2 young boys, this is practically a minor emergency. So I pack us up and head to the nearest laundromat, boys in tow. The kids are being kids, watching the laundry go around and around in the machines, playing with the little cars that they have brought, and etc. The owner of the laundromat, a middle-aged Asian man, comes out and starts talking to them. He didn't do so in a creepy way, but he's clearly entertained by them. He gives them small candies and a quarter for the little quarter machines. I thought he was being nice until he started talking to me. He began telling me how lucky I am to have 2 boys, which I of course agree with. That's when things get strange. He then starts telling me how his wife only gave him daughters, and how shameful it was to him to have daughters. At first, I think this guy is kidding around, but the resentment is practically erupting through his pores. He starts telling me how he wanted to find a new wife that would give him sons. At this point, thankfully, my husband walks in. I think he was nearby in the strip mall anyway, and stopped to see if I needed help. Does this deter the man? Not even in the slightest. He actually congratulates my husband on having a wife that gave him sons, and starts lamenting him with all the woes of having daughters. I start packing everything and everyone up because it's honestly just getting creepy. As we are leaving, the man says to my husband, "How much for her? I'll give you 10,000. We blow him off because surely he is kidding. As I'm halfway out the door, he comes back with a higher offer, at which point my husband tells him to chill. We're very easygoing people, so we don't get all high-strung, and there were definitely some cultural differences that we didn't want to insult. That said, laundromat man, I'm sure you have learned to love your daughters, and I hope that you do learn to love them. Also, learn that it isn't your wife's fault for giving birth to girls." Anyways, creepy stuff happens in small towns sometimes. Might not be the creepiest thing ever, but definitely made me feel uncomfortable that day. Thank you for listening to my story. My name is John and I live in Pennsylvania, in a small town called Jim Thorpe. This happened 2 years ago in June. I also live on Indian land where a lot of Indians were slaughtered in the past. This was a few days after my birthday. I asked my mom and dad if I could go camping by myself for a day. They agreed and I gathered my survival gear. I had packed a lighter and flare just in case I mess up with the flint and steel or got lost. I set out in the forest and followed the creek 4 miles into the deep woods. But the evergreen trees made the forest dark even though it was a really nice day. I got to the area that I scouted out 5 days before. I set up my tent, then my campfire, and I cooked some baked beans and steak over the fire. For some reason, the entire time setting up I just felt like I was being watched, and didn't think anything of it as I watched as my food cooked. After I had my wonderful food, I hear what sounds like a snap of a branch from behind me. Behind me was a massive rhododendron. I jumped so high I almost landed in the fire. I quickly turned and saw some deer staring at me. Thinking I overreacted, I laughed. I felt kind of stupid because I was scared by some deer. I got up and scared off the deer. They ran off, but oddly enough, one stayed staring at me. I was creeped out by that, thinking what the hell is wrong with this deer. As I move closer, it finally runs off. Later that night, I was laying by the fire when I hear the snapping of branches again. But this time hours later from the last sound. Creeped out but not wanting to be a girl, I looked for a source of the sound. I saw what made the sound and it wasn't a deer. This thing was like 7 feet tall. It was deer-like and human-like, but it had like demon features to it. It was up against an oak tree staring me down. I was breathless. I was petrified. Then, it moved from behind the tree and this thing was leaning over. It now stood at least 8 feet tall, and it was about 200 yards away, looking dead into my soul. The eyes were orangish. I tried to move, but it jerked in a weird movement. It was like mimicking and mocking my movements with a smile. I knew if I ran, it would kill me, way before I reached my bag. I tried to grab my flare gun and shoot it in the face. This creature screamed with this terrifying laugh as it sprinted so fast into the dark. I was up all night until the morning, listening to the laughter from this thing in the distance. My knife was in my right hand and my flare gun was in my left hand. I had a petrified walk home with the hearing of laughter all the way there. I think it was a Wendigo. But tell me, what do you guys think? I grew up in a deep holler in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia, in a county called Calhoun. I grew up in a heavily haunted holler. It was host to many burnt buildings, the death of children, that sort of thing. It was worse during the summer when all the power would get knocked out and we had to rely on the wood stove for heat and food. We also had to boil snow for water in those times. They were always trying, but it made us stronger. This happened when I was about 13 or 14. My mom had made a pot of beef stew and we decided to bring a thermos full of it to a neighbor. I was bored, having no power for TV or video games, so I offered to take it to them. I had an uneventful walk down there, but on the way back, I started to hear what sounded like footsteps that were out of step with mine. I just shrugged and kept walking. I then started hearing breathing, almost like gasping, like someone was being choked, and then a slight cough. I turned and, to my surprise, no one was there. The old-timers always said, "Don't let the spirit see your fear," so I just kept walking. Then came the infamous part, the part all the old-timers talk about. They said when you're actually being bothered by the spirits, the last part of the encounter is that it will culminate in a 10-minute din of a baby and young boy crying and coughing until they give one last cough and sputter. It happened that night, and when it did I ran home with tears in my eyes. They also claimed that when you are followed in the snow as I had been, a set of soot-covered footprints will appear next to your set of boots the next day. That was also true. The story about these certain spirits came to haunt the holler is on a snowy night a couple of 100 years back, a house caught on fire. 7 of the 10 children in the fire didn't make it. The entire farm burned down. The remaining 3, all boys, got killed fighting the Confederates a few years later. The claim is that the children were so unhappy about their brothers dying so senselessly that they started to haunt the holler out of pain and anger. Creepy stuff, definitely. Let me know what you guys think of this. This all takes place in West Virginia when I was about 8 or 9 in 2010. I was living with my mom at the time and her now ex-husband along with my brother and stepsister. We had just moved there from Colorado because my stepdad at the time was in the military. We moved one more time after that up until my mom and him split. At first, I remember the house being pretty normal. Even got a couple of dogs in that house, which will come more into play later on if I get the chance. There were a few experiences that took place in that house that I believed were ghosts. I was not the only person to experience something in that house, but I'll start with what I remember, and then go into what I was told after we had moved. There was one night I had went to bed all snuggled in my blankets when my eyes shot open for some reason. The room was dark besides a little castle nightlight I had forced my stepdad to get me, because I saw a head floating in my closet, but that ended up being a stuffed animal, allegedly. Anyways, the room was dimly lit by my nightlight when all of a sudden I see a black butterfly flutter into my room, then evaporate once it reached the other side of my room by the window. Then it started, the footsteps. Now these didn't sound like heavy boot footsteps you'd be hearing all the time in these types of stories, but normal walking around footsteps. They'd move from my doorway from one side of my bed to the other, then out the door, down the hallway, and around the house. They were loud. After a while, I got tired of listening to them. Like the intelligent intellectual I was, I decided to wait till the footsteps were in a different part of the house and sprint over to my TV to distract myself of the confusing yet horrifying situation. George Lopez was on. I watched the show and surely I forgot what was even happening at the time. Hopefully, I would never remember this spirit walking around my room. Sadly though, until this day, I think I pissed it off because not too long after turning on the TV I hear a long scratch move down the closet wall. You better believe I bolted out of that room and jumped into my mom's bed crying for her to wake up. As cliche as this sounds, she puts me back in bed, gets me a glass of water and tells me it's only a dream. There are more experiences from me and other people in my family, but I'll have to do another part later on if you would like me to submit more stories. I grew up in a small town where you wouldn't necessarily know everybody, but you're definitely familiar with most people in the town. This story happened when I was maybe 15, maybe 16 years old, so about 15 years ago. I was on my way to practice one Saturday morning when I noticed an older man on the corner ahead staring at me. Being the person I am, who's fairly friendly, I smile and wave at the guy as I pass. But then, I always smiled at everybody. I stop at the same corner waiting to cross. The guy comes right up behind me, and I vaguely remember smelling him, feeling him breathing on my neck. I'm a bit worried but brush it off as I'm being overreactionary possibly. The light changes and I carry on, and this guy speeds up walking behind me, mumbling something to get my attention. I must have looked terrified because a woman begins to walk next to me asking if I know the guy. I tell her that I don't and she stays in pace with me and has to go into the local grocery store. She makes me go with her. We get to the store and the lady immediately grabs an employee at the register for help. At this point, I'm shaking in fear, trying to hide behind people standing by the register. They are discussing something, but I can't hear them that well. I'm not sure of what exactly they were saying because the guy was following me and was staring at me through the window, making a throat-slicing motion, and I was just there paralyzed in fear. The people at the store gathered around to make me feel safe. I was pretty sure I broke down in tears when he did that, and soon after the cops came, I watched them arrest this man. I don't remember much after that besides my parents picking me up from the store and going to the police station. My dad actually worked as a dispatcher in town at the time, and he told me a few days later that the guy was off his meds and had been brought to a local psych hospital for treatment. I never saw that man or the woman who saved me after that. To my guardian angel, I never got the chance to thank you for protecting me. And I hope that guy who wanted to slice my throat ends up getting his throat sliced by someone a lot more foul than he was. Thanks for listening to these allegedly true, creepy small town stories. These were some truly creepy experiences, and I surely hope none of this ever happens to any of you guys. If you have a story you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and comment down below, letting me know you made it all the way to the very end. From now on, I'll be picking one person who comments "Shrek Can't Dance" to win a free Swamp Dweller t-shirt. Thanks again for always dwelling in the swamp. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.
What's even more pathetic is the fact that this swamp dweller guy probably sits in his mother's basement all day, making scary videos, while the rest of us are out there making a living in the real world. You call this shit scary? Seriously? 100,000 people actually flock to this garbage? You've got to be kidding me.